Hi there, welcome to Mimi Leaks. The complaint we will be looking at in this video is 26 pages long. It's filled with extremely graphic, violent, disturbing allegations, so it comes with a trigger warning for violence, humiliation, SA, other heinous acts that are just terrible. So keep that in mind, please. And Thaila Graves, as you can see the name up there, is the person who filed the complaint. She was 53 currently and filed a civil lawsuit last week against Sean Combs and Joseph Big Joe Sherman. Sherman is Combs' former bodyguard at the time of the incident, the alleged incident, and it's alleged that Combs and Sherman drugged and SA'd her, her being Ms. Graves, in 2001. And Ms. Graves claims that the assault left her with lasting physical ailments, including chronic pain and a fear of leaving her house. Graves was 25 at the time and in a romantic relationship with former executive at Bad Boy. According to the complaint, she was unknowingly given a substance, lost consciousness, and taken to the Bad Boy Records studio in New York City, where she was violently assaulted. The assault was recorded, distributed for, among other things, to humiliate the plaintiff and to drive a wedge between herself and her at-the-time boyfriend. And again, that's according to the complaint. But before I go any further, thank you for supporting the channel with likes and subscriptions. I'm so happy to see the interest in these documents, and I'm humbled that anyone would listen to me read them. I just thank you so much. Please share the channel on social media and with anyone you think may find the content interesting. As you can see, I've censored some words through the document, just words that I know go against YouTube's guidelines and policies, but I have a feeling that there will be a bit of stumbling as I try to read and properly abbreviate the censored words and phrases. I would likely say the first letter of any given censored word. If I'm unable to swap the word or term for another word that's more acceptable, then yeah, I'll probably just say R or SA, that sort of thing. But we'll see how it goes. And again, trigger warning on this content. Complaint and demand for jury trial out of U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York. Thaila Graves, plaintiff versus, and there's a list, Sean Combs, Joseph Sherman, Daddy's House Recordings, CE Opco, DBA Combs Global, FKA Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Production Holdings, Bad Boy Books Holdings, Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Production, and Organizational Does 1 through 10 defendants. Plaintiff Thaila Graves, plaintiff, by and through her attorneys, Allred Morocco and Goldberg, and Hecker Wang, for her complaint, alleges as follows. Introduction. In or around the summer of 2001, plaintiff's life was violently knocked off course, while defendants Sean Combs and Joseph Sherman viciously argued her at Bad Boy Records studio in New York City. Plaintiff was 25 at the time and dating one of Combs' employees, a relationship that Combs exploited to lure the plaintiff into meeting him and Sherman alone. Once they successfully sequestered the plaintiff, Combs and Sherman gave plaintiff a drink, likely laced with a drug that eventually caused her to lose consciousness briefly. She awoke to find herself bound and restrained. Combs and Sherman proceeded to brutally SA and violate plaintiff. Combs mercilessly blanked her, and Sherman forcefully slammed the plaintiff onto the table, slapped her, and repeatedly thrust his blank into her mouth. Both men were undeterred by plaintiff's cries for help throughout the attack. Plaintiff never recovered from defendant's Violet R. She had thoughts of unaliving and ideation that has received extensive psychological treatment because of the attack. For decades, she remained silent and did not report the crime out of fear that defendants would use their power to ruin her. They repeatedly, explicitly threatened to do so. To this day, plaintiff suffers from depression, severe depression, anxiety, and panic attacks, and still lives in fear of defendants. Any progress plaintiff has made in healing from the attack over the years was dramatically reversed in or around November 27, 2023, when she learned for the first time that Combs and Sherman had video recorded the horrific R 22 years before and shown the video to multiple men seeking to publicly degrade and humiliate both plaintiff and her boyfriend. Plaintiff could not believe that defendants would record themselves committing such a gruesome crime and then proceed proudly and widely to disseminate the recording of it. She was distraught and sunk into deep depression. She again considered unaliving herself. This action seeks redress from defendants brutalizing, misogynistic, and violent attacks on plaintiff, starting in 2001 with their R, and continuing in the subsequent years as they compounded her humiliation by showing the video of the essay to others. Parties. Plaintiff Thaila Graves is a female who resides in Harris County, Texas, which is the Houston metropolitan area. Defendant Sean Combs is a male who, on information and belief, resides in Los Angeles County, California, though at the time of the filing was incarcerated in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. Upon information and belief, at all relevant times, Combs owned and or controlled the following: Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Production Holdings, Bad Boy Books Holdings, Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Productions, collectively all known as Bad Boy, Daddy's House Recording Studio, CE Opco, doing business as Combs Global, formerly known as Combs Enterprises, altogether the Combs Corporations. The facts of Combs' ownership and titles at the Combs Corporation enabled him to commit the unlawful SV against plaintiff described herein, and or to harass and subsequently intimidate her into her silence. Defendant Joseph Sherman, also known as Big Joe, is a male who, on information and belief, resides in Westchester County, New York. On information and belief, Sherman was employed by Combs and or by the Combs Corporations during the relevant period. The facts of Combs' ownership and titles and Sherman's titles at the Combs Corporations enabled Sherman to commit the unlawful SV against plaintiff described herein and to harass and subsequently intimidate her into silence after the R. Defendant Daddy's House Holdings, Inc., Daddy's House, is a domestic business corporation that is incorporated in New York and, on information and belief, now has its principal place of business on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, California. Combs is listed as the CEO in public filings with the listed address on Broadway, New York, New York. At the time of the events alleged herein, Daddy's House was a recording studio, a world-class recording studio, owned by Combs, located on 44th Street in New York. Upon information and belief, at all relevant times, Bad Boy and Combs together owned and operated Daddy's House. Upon information and belief, the Bad Boy recording studio was located on the premises of Daddy's House. It's Daddy's House is a lot. Okay. Combs and Sherman used the Daddy's House premises and their ownership titles at Daddy's House to commit the unlawful SV against plaintiff described herein and to harass and subsequently intimidate her into silence. Defendants CE Opco, doing business as Combs Global, formerly known as Combs Enterprises. Combs Global, hopefully here forward, is a limited liability corporation incorporated in Delaware that has its principal place on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, California. Upon information and belief, all members of the Combs Global are citizens of Delaware, New York, and or California. Upon information and belief, Combs Global is an alter ego for Combs and or a successor in interest to Combs, other corporations, and or was established or used by Combs for the purpose of moving, disposing of, and or insulating his assets, including in connection with his criminal activities and to avoid liability. Combs Global currently owns, controls, and or oversees Bad Boy and Combs' other business ventures in the music, fashion, fragrance, beverage, marketing, film, television, and media industries. As part of his renowned Bad Boy record label and brand, Combs had established several corporate entities under the Bad Boy name over the past few decades, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Production Holdings, Bad Boy Books Holdings, Bad Boy Records, and Bad Boy Productions, together Bad Boys. Bad Boy. On information and belief, all active Bad Boy entities are now owned and or controlled by Combs and or by Combs Global. Combs and Sherman used the Bad Boy premises/recording studio and their ownership and titles at Bad Boy to commit the unlawful SV against plaintiff described herein and or to harass and subsequently intimidate her into silence. Defendant Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings is a domestic business corporation incorporated in New York that, on information and belief, has now moved its principal place of business at Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, California. Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings is part of that Bad Boy enterprise owned and operated by Combs, and on information and belief is now owned and or controlled by Combs and or by Combs Global. Combs is listed as the CEO in public filings with a listed address on Broadway in New York, New York. B. Defendant Bad Boy Productions Holdings is a domestic business corporation incorporated in New York that, on information and belief, now has its principal place of business on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, California. Bad Boy Productions Holdings is part of the Bad Boy enterprise founded and owned by Combs, and on information and belief is now owned and or controlled by Combs and or by Combs Global. Combs is listed as CEO in public filings with the listed address on Broadway in New York, New York. C. Defendant Bad Boy Holdings is a domestic business corporation incorporated in New York that, on information and belief, now has its principal place of business on Broadway in New York, New York. Bad Boy Books Holdings is part of the Bad Boy enterprise founded and owned by Combs, and on information and belief is now owned and or controlled by Combs and or by Combs Global. The CEO listed on the public filings is Eddie Norward Jr., with a listed address on Broadway in New York, New York. The same address listed for Sean Combs in public filings for Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Production Holdings, and Daddy's House Recordings. D. Defendant Bad Boy Records is a Delaware limited liability company that, on information and belief, is headquartered in New York and or California. On information and belief, all members of Bad Boy Records are citizens of Delaware, New York, and or California. On information and belief, Bad Boy Records is part of the Bad Boy enterprise and or a successor in interest to other Bad Boy defendants that comprise the Bad Boy enterprise founded and owned by Combs. On information and belief, Bad Boy Records is now owned and or controlled by Combs and or Combs Global. Defendant Bad Boy Entertainment is a New York limited liability company that, on information and belief, is headquartered in New York and or California. On information and belief, all members of Bad Boy Entertainment are citizens of New York and or California. Bad Boy Entertainment is part of the Bad Boy enterprise and or a successor in interest to other Bad Boy defendants that comprise the Bad Boy enterprise found and owned by Combs. On information and belief, Bad Boy Entertainment is now owned and or controlled by Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings and or by Combs and or by Combs Global. Defendant Bad Boy Productions is a New York limited liability company, and this is F, that, on information and belief, all members of Bad Boy Productions are citizens of New York and/or California. Bad Boy Productions is part of the Bad Boy enterprise and/or a successor in interest to other Bad Boy defendants that comprise the Bad Boy enterprise founded and owned by Combs. On information and belief, Bad Boy Productions is now owned and/or controlled by Combs and/or by Combs Global. Defendants' organizational does 1 through 10 are currently unknown entities who were owned by and/or employed by defendants Combs and/or Sherman and enabled the commission and the conduct complained of herein. As the parties engage in discovery, plaintiff retains the right to amend the complaint to add these entities by name. Each of the Combs Corporation, A, aided and abetted Combs and Sherman in committing the unlawful SV against the plaintiff described herein and/or in harassing and subsequently intimidating her into silence after the R. B, provided Combs and Sherman with the studio or office space where they committed the R, and/or with chattel, including recording equipment, storage equipment, etc., to record the R and disseminate it. C, are alter egos for Combs, completely dominated by him and used for his personal interests and to engage in wrongdoing which harmed plaintiff and others. And/or D, serve or have served as vehicles for Combs to move, dispose of, and/or insulate his assets, including in connection with his criminal activities, and to avoid compensating the victims of his many crimes, including the plaintiff. Jurisdiction and venue. This court has subject matter jurisdiction pursuant to 28 U.S.C. U.S. Code 1332 because this case is between citizens of a different state and the amount in controversy exceeds $75,000. This court has specific personal jurisdiction over defendants because the acts giving rise to plaintiffs' claims took place in New York State, and because several of the defendants are domiciled in New York State and regularly transact business in New York State. Venue is proper in this district pursuant to 28 U.S. Code 1391 because a substantial part of the events or omissions giving rise to the claims occurred in this district. Jury demand. Plaintiff hereby demands a trial by jury on her claims in this action. Factual allegations. Okay, and this is where it's going to get difficult or even more clunky, but I'm going to try my best to abbreviate or to skip over and properly term the words I don't want to say. Background. Plaintiff's family immigrated to New York City when plaintiff was a teenager in connection with her mother's work. Her family ultimately settled in Rego Park, Queens, where she completed her education and where she lived when she met Combs. Defendant Combs, who is also known by his stage names Puff Daddy, Puffy, P. Diddy, Diddy, Brother Love, or Love, is a prominent rapper, record executive, and businessman. He rose to fame in the 1990s with his record label Bad Boy and continued to be a notable figure in the music and entertainment industry in the following years. Combs has amassed wealth and power through his business ventures in the music, fashion, fragrance, beverage, marketing, film, television, and media industries. Bad Boy Enterprise is the foundation of Combs' wealth and power. Bad Boy has sold over 500 million records through its lucrative distribution deals with the top music companies in the world and has signed acclaimed hip-hop and R&B artists, including the Notorious B.I.G., Mary J. Blige, and Usher. Combs later founded CE Opco, aka Combs Enterprises, later rebranded as Combs Global, to serve as a home for his portfolio of businesses, including his investments in the music, fashion, fragrance, beverage, marketing, film, television, and media industries. On information and belief, Combs Global houses Bad Boys and other notable businesses such as the Combs fashion line, Sean John, his vodka line, Ciroc, and his cable media company, Revolt Media. As detailed later in the factual allegations, Combs has a long history of violence and abusing and SAing women, as there have been several civil lawsuits filed against Combs in the past year alleging violence and abuse. On September 16, 2024, Combs was arrested and charged with racketeering and trafficking. He was denied bail. Defendant Sherman, also known as Big Joe, was employed by Combs as his bodyguard and head of security during the relevant time period discussed herein and served in various roles in the Combs corporations. Sherman is also the founder of Rhymes in Dimes Magazine, Inc., a New York State registered corporation, and through in connection with that company, produces and distributes P. On information and belief, he has often distributed videos of his friends' SAs through his P company. Plaintiff met defendant Combs in or around late 1999 or early 2000 through her then boyfriend, who was an executive at Bad Boy. In addition to working together, plaintiff's boyfriend and Combs had a close personal relationship. Plaintiff frequently visited her boyfriend at the Bad Boy studio in New York City and attended events hosted at Combs' residences. Over time, plaintiff became familiar with Combs, and he knew about her relationship with her boyfriend. Defendants provide substances unwillingly and violently are the plaintiff. In or around the summer of 2001, plaintiff received a call from Combs concerning her boyfriend's employment at Bad Boy. He told her he wanted to meet with her in person to discuss her boyfriend's supposed performance issues. Her boyfriend was determined to climb up the ladder at Combs' record label, and his romantic partner, plaintiff was committed to helping him. Plaintiff agreed to meet with Combs. In retrospect, it was evidently a sick and twisted way of using his ownership of and title at Bad Boy and its affiliate entities to abuse the plaintiff and show his power and ability to humiliate her boyfriend, his executive. A few hours later, Combs arrived at plaintiff's mother's residence in Queens with Sherman, who was employed by Combs as his bodyguard at the time. Sherman was driving an SUV and Combs was in the back seat. As plaintiff entered the vehicle, Combs offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted. Combs began discussing his alleged concerns about her boyfriend's appearance at work. Meanwhile, as plaintiff drank what had been handed to her, she started to feel lightheaded, dizzy, and physically weak. In retrospect, it is clear that Combs had caused a substance to be put into plaintiff's drink, as a few sips of wine had never impacted her that way. Combs and Sherman drove the plaintiff to the Bad Boy studio in Manhattan. When they arrived, plaintiff tried to get out of the car, and she realized she was feeling odd, and she found it difficult to walk. She assumed this was her fault, and did her best to act normal, and followed Combs as he led her eventually to a couch in a private room at the Bad Boy studio. She later came to understand that this was Combs' personal lounge and office at Bad Boy studio. Combs sat on the couch next to the plaintiff and continued speaking to her. Plaintiff began feeling even more woozy and sedated. She then lost consciousness. When the plaintiff regained consciousness, she was undressed and her hands were tied behind her back with what felt like a plastic grocery bag. Plaintiff shouted for help. In response, Sherman lifted her up from the couch and forcefully slammed her face down on what was apparently a pool table. Shortly thereafter, Combs entered the room, undressed. Combs reached for a container of lubricant that smelled like menthol and proceeded to apply it to his blank. He then bent plaintiff over the table, causing her feet to dangle above the floor, forcefully held her down, and penetrated her without consent. Plaintiff is 4 feet 11 inches tall, weighs only 103 pounds at the time. Plaintiff screamed out in pain, but Combs continued to violently AR her. He easily physically overpowered her, smashing her head down on the pool table while she futilely tried to wiggle out from under him. During the brutal attack, plaintiff vomited into her mouth and on the table. At one point, she involuntarily defecated. Combs was undeterred. He wiped himself off, applied more lubricant, and without any acknowledgement of plaintiff's distress, proceeded to V-penetrate the plaintiff. Plaintiff experienced intense pain and burning sensations in her V and A. Plaintiff continued to scream for help because of the extreme pain she felt as Combs penetrated her over and over. She lost consciousness again. The next time she regained consciousness, Plaintiff was on the couch, and Sherman was standing in front of her with his bare pee in her face. Sherman slapped Plaintiff in the face and forcefully inserted it into her mouth. Sherman slapped her yet again and continued to thrust. Plaintiff once again lost consciousness. When she next awoke, Plaintiff was on the couch, naked and alone in her room. Plaintiff was in severe distress. Her body parts burned, her face and wrist were bruised, and private areas, smelled strongly of menthol. She felt a liquid, presumably male reproductive fluid, dripping from inside her. Her dress was thrown over her, and her purse was on the couch next to her, and her bra was on the floor nearby. She did not see her underpants. Terrified that Combs and Sherman would return, the plaintiff quickly got dressed and bolted out of the studio where she had been SA'd. Still dizzy and weak, plaintiff called a livery driver that her family regularly hired and knew well. The driver picked her up from outside Bad Boy Studio. She was disheveled, crying uncontrollably, and suffering from agonizing pain. The driver drove her to the hospital and tried to convince her to report the SA and to get an R kit, but she was unable to leave the car, shaking and crying hysterically, and terrified of what Combs would do to her and to her family if she reported him. The aftermath and impact of the R on plaintiff. Plaintiff sustained serious physical injuries in the aftermath of the R. As noted, she had burning in her V and A and bruising on her wrists and face. In the days after the assault, she suffered prolonged A bleeding and hemorrhoids. Because of Combs's power and notoriety, plaintiff was able to report what had happened. She was involved in a contentious divorce and custody battle at the time and feared that reporting the R would cause her to lose custody of the young child. Plaintiff confided in her boyfriend, Combs's employee, hoping he would comfort and support her. But instead of supporting her, he discouraged her from disclosing the assault, telling her that it could negatively impact his own career. Following the assault and multiple times over the years, both Combs and Sherman contacted the plaintiff and warned her to be silent, threatening repercussions, including the plaintiff potentially losing custody of her son if she ever disclosed the assault. Because of their enormous power in the industry, including through their own ownership and positions at the Combs corporations, plaintiff knew that they could follow through on their threats. Plaintiff told close friends that Combs and Sherman had drugged and savagely R'd her, but as noted, was afraid to report the attack to the police out of fear that defendants would follow through on their threats. She was even afraid to stay in the NYC area while Combs lived there, so with the help of a friend, she fled to Pennsylvania. Plaintiff has in fact relocated multiple times throughout the years in an effort to stay away from Combs. Plaintiff has suffered irreparable harm because of the brutal art by defendants Combs and Sherman. She suffers from severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. She has also suffered unaliving ideation and intrusive thoughts and has attempted to end her life. The plaintiff lives in constant fear. She struggles with hypervigilance and experiences anxiety and panic attacks in social settings, preferring to be alone. Her need to hide to feel safe has strained her relationships with family and friends. Defendants R has also impacted the plaintiff's ability to engage in S acts with her intimate partners. To this day, she cannot be in certain S positions without experiencing flashbacks of Combs violently doing something to her from behind, is the best way I can put it. Okay. Plaintiff learns that the R was videotaped and published. On or around November 27, 2023, all of the trauma of the R came flooding back to the plaintiff when her former boyfriend revealed to her for the first time that Combs and Sherman had recorded and published the video of the horrific attack. Earlier that month, Cassie Ventura had come forward and filed a lawsuit against Combs for subjecting her to years of severe S&P abuse. The case had been settled one day after it was filed. The plaintiff's former boyfriend invoked Ms. Ventura's efforts to hold Combs accountable and for the first time confessed that years earlier, but sometimes after the actual R itself, Sherman and Combs had showed him a group of men, some of who were also employed by Combs's companies and or other entities, the plaintiff video of being R'd. He disclosed that Combs and Sherman had a pattern of practice of non-consensually recording women engaging in certain acts and making those videos available to the public, including by selling tapes as P. A Bad Boy artist later corroborated in a text message that Sherman, quote, used to sell P of him doing this to chicks, unquote, and that Sherman, quote, did that to a lot of women, unquote. Plaintiff's former boyfriend reported that he and other men watched the recording of the plaintiff's R on handheld cameras while at the Bad Boy studio in New York City. Combs, Sherman, and some of the other men made derogatory comments about the former boyfriend's relationship with the plaintiff in an attempt to shame him and into cutting ties with the plaintiff and to cause her further emotional harm and embarrassment. On information and belief, defendants continued to show the video of her R to others over the years and through the present and or sold as P. After over 2 decades spent trying to heal and distance herself from the experience, plaintiff was devastated by the news. She felt as if her life had been turned upside down again, and like the R, had been happening again and again, even as she was trying to forget it. She experienced acute psychological distress, plunging into deep depression and having ideations of unaliving herself. She felt intense fear, anger, and anxiety. Plaintiff lives with the distress of knowing that the video of her brutal R is in circulation and that anyone, including her family, friends, and peers, could view it at any time. In a panic, she reached out to Sherman after learning about the tape, hoping to protect herself from further humiliation by convincing him to destroy the tape or to provide it to her, but he did not respond. Combs's pattern and practice of violence and abuse, including of administering substances, R-ing, and secretly recording his violence against women. Combs has a long history of violence and abuse. This long-standing behavior has been enabled by his ownership and titles at the Combs corporations and their affiliated entities, and with the immense wealth and power he has amassed through such business dealings. Among a long list of allegations, in 1996 he was found guilty of criminal mischief for threatening a photographer from the New York Post with a gun. In 1999, he was arrested and charged with second-degree assault and criminal mischief in connection with the beating of a record executive, and arrested again the same year in relation to a shooting at a club in New York. That female victim has consistently stated that Combs shot her in the face at point-blank range. Combs also has a pattern and practice of using his power and influence in the music and entertainment industries to submit people to SV, often administering substances to his victims and or coercing them to consume substances and recording the assaults, often without the victim's knowledge, just as he did with the plaintiff. In the past year, a number of these people have come forward to accuse Combs of SA and violent acts and other violent acts. In November 2023, 3 assaults were filed against Combs under the New York Adult Survivors Act. As noted above, Cassie Ventura, an artist signed to Bad Boy, sued Combs in the SDNY for R and years-long physical abuse, facilitated in part by Combs having supplied Ms. Ventura with copious amounts of substances and urging her to take them, beginning in 2006. Combs regularly recorded Ms. Ventura engaging in SAs as he forced her to engage in. Joy Dickerson Neal, who had appeared with Combs in a music video and sued Combs at New York County Supreme Court, alleged Combs gave her substances, SA'd her, and secretly recorded the assault in 1991. Liza Gardner, I'm sorry, there was A and that was B. This is C. Liza Gardner, whom Combs met at an event hosted by a record label affiliated with Bad Boy, sued him for R-ing her and a friend in 90 or 91 when she was only 16. In December 2023, an anonymous plaintiff sued Combs in the SDNY for administering substances and gang R-ing her in 2003 when she was only 17 years old. The complaint alleges that Combs and one of his business associates and employees lured the plaintiff to Daddy's house through their affiliation with the Bad Boy Enterprise and its related entities, and R-ed her in the same location where the plaintiff was R-ed. In February 2024, Rodney Lil Rod Jones, one of Combs' former producers, sued Combs for forcing him to engage in unwanted SAs and sex trafficking, among other allegations. In that complaint, Mr. Jones alleges that Combs regularly administered substances to others, including minors, by giving them alcoholic beverages laced with E and other DR drugs, that he believes he himself was given substances by Combs, and that Combs routinely secretly recorded S encounters. F. In May of 24, two more women sued Combs. Former model Christy McKinney sued Combs in the Southern District of New York for administering substances and SAing her at his recording studio in 2003. Combs had promised to help advance Ms. McKinney's modeling career, a promise she believed he would fulfill because of his ownership and/or titles at the Bad Boy Enterprise and its related entities. April Lampos, an intern at Arista Records, which was an owner of Bad Boy, also sued Combs in May of 24 in New York County Supreme Court for R-ing her on multiple occasions, secretly filming at least one of the assaults, and showing the recording to multiple people. Ms. Lampros alleges that Combs ordered her to take substances on one occasion before he R-ed her. In July of 24, former adult film star Adria English, who was employed by Combs as an entertainer at his infamous white parties that brought together the biggest names in music and entertainment industries, sued Combs in the SDNY for S trafficking, alleging that he required her to consume drinks laced with E and secretly recorded the S acts he forced her to engage in. H. In September 2024, singer and songwriter Dawn Angelique Richard also sued Combs. Richard was employed by Combs as part of the girl group Danity Kane, formed by Combs, and later as a key member of Combs' band Diddy Dirty Money. She sued Combs in the SDNY for SA, false imprisonment, and for subjecting her to hostile working conditions due to her gender, including degrading comments and threats. Ms. Richard had alleged that Combs regularly supplied others, including minors, with copious amounts of substances and alcohol, and subjected them to S acts while they were sedated or unconscious due to drugs and alcohol. She sued Combs in the SDNY for SA, false imprisonment, and for subjecting her to hostile working conditions due to her gender, including degrading comments and threats. Ms. Richard has alleged that Combs regularly supplied others, including minors, with copious amounts of substances and alcohol, subjecting them to S acts while they were sedated and or unconscious due to the substances and alcohol. On September 16, 2024, Combs was arrested at a Manhattan hotel after a grand jury indicted him on charges of S trafficking and racketeering. The indictment details how, quote, for decades, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his S desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct, unquote. It notes that Combs's abuse of women was enabled by, quote, the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, S trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice, unquote. The indictment also notes that Combs's businesses were operated at various times in both Manhattan and Los Angeles, quote, under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global, collectively the Combs Business, unquote. According to the indictment, quote, physical abuse by Combs was recurrent and widely known, unquote. It also notes that Combs's assaults on women, including, quote, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them, unquote. Combs was also charged with, quote, using the Combs business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his abuse and commercial S, unquote. And the indictment notes that his employees' conduct was, quote, facilitated and assisted by Combs's control of the Combs business, unquote. The indictment specifically refers to the involvement of Combs's security staff, likely referring to Sherman. It notes that Sherman and his affiliates recorded SAs and controlled victims through the use of substances. In or about March of 24, law enforcement seized narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant from Combs's residences. Combs' long history of violence against women makes unmistakably clear that his actions, including the attack of the plaintiff, have been motivated by gender. Specifically, his profound contempt for women and an ongoing practice of denigrating and trying to humiliate them. Combs's treatment of plaintiff accords with the pattern and practice of administering substances, R-ing, and secretly recording the women he is abusing. First cause of action. Violation of New York Diddy. There are 3 causes of action in this complaint. The first one is violation of New York City Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act, all defendants. Plaintiff hereby incorporates each of the foregoing paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. By viciously and violently forcing S contact and certain types of S intercourse on the plaintiff, defendants Combs and Sherman committed a, quote, crime of violence motivated by gender, unquote, under the Victims of Gender Motivated Protection Act, as defined in New York City Administrative Code 10-1103, and it might be referred to hereafter as VGMVPA. We shall see. The requirement that the crime of violence be committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due, at least in part, to an animus based on the victim's gender is satisfied because Combs and Sherman violently forced the plaintiff to engage in certain types of intercourse without her consent. Gender animus inheres when consent is absent. Moreover, Combs's long history of violence against women evinces a deep contempt for women, as does Sherman's alleged pattern of committing his own SAs, recording them, and selling them as P. Defendants Combs and Sherman's R's of plaintiff presented a risk of physical injury to her, a serious risk, and in fact caused her significant physical injuries, including burning and pain to private parts, bleeding and bruising to her face and wrists. The Combs Corporation enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender because Combs and Sherman are the plaintiff at Bad Boy Studio, where, on information and belief, they routinely committed SAs and gender-motivated violence, as detailed in other civil lawsuits. Given Combs and Sherman's long-standing pattern of practice committing violence against women, including at the same location where they are the plaintiff, the Combs Corporations had and/or should have had knowledge of Combs and Sherman using the premises for unlawful conduct, and did nothing to stop it. The Combs Corporation enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender and failing to, among other things, protect the plaintiff from a known danger and/or have sufficient policies and procedures in place to prevent SAs and/or train their employees on identifying and preventing SAs. Given Combs and Sherman's long-standing pattern and practice of committing violence against women, including on premises owned and operated by defendants, the Combs Corporation had or should have had knowledge that Combs and Sherman were a danger to the plaintiff and did nothing to stop Combs and Sherman. The Combs Corporation enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender by failing to properly supervise Combs and/or Sherman. Further, Combs, as the owner of Bad Boy and Daddy's house, watched the plaintiff being AR'd by his employee on premises of Bad Boy. The Combs Corporation had knowledge and/or should have had knowledge of Combs's widespread and well-known practice of committing SAs and gender-motivated violence, including on premises owned and/or operated by the defendant, and did nothing to stop it. The Combs Corporation further enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender by actively placing, maintaining, and/or employing Combs and/or Sherman in positions of power and authority, despite the fact that they knew and/or should have known that Combs had a widespread and well-known practice of committing SAs and gender-motivated violence, including on premises owned and/or operated by the defendants. Combs and Sherman used their title and authority conferred by the Combs Corporation, including as CEO, founder, and chairman, Combs, and head of security, Sherman, to facilitate and perpetrate the violent assault on the plaintiff and to intimidate and force the plaintiff to keep quiet in subsequent years. The Combs Corporations also enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender because Combs and Sherman used the plaintiff's boyfriend and his employment as an executive for Bad Boy and Daddy's house, and their stated concerns about his performance at work to lure the plaintiff out of her home to meet with them alone. On information and belief, plaintiff alleges that defendant organizational does 1 through 10, inclusive, are other parties not yet identified who have enabled Combs and/or Sherman to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender in the ways articulated above and/or in other ways. As a result of defendant's actions, plaintiffs suffered damages in an amount to be determined at trial and pursuant to the fee-shifting provision of the statute. This legal action has been commenced within the statutory timeframe provided by the 2-year look-back window for VGM VPA claims. See New York, blah, 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 blah. This legal action has been commenced within the statutory timeframe provided by a 2-year look-back window for VGM VPA claims. See New York City Administrative Code 10-1105. Second cause of action, violation of New York Civil Rights Law 52B, Combs and Sherman. Plaintiff hereby incorporates each of the foregoing paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. By R-ing the plaintiff and recording it, defendants cause plaintiff to be depicted in a video image unclothed and with intimate body parts exposed, and engaging in conduct with another person in violation of New York Civil Rights Law 52B. Defendants published and/or disseminated the video without the plaintiff's knowledge or consent. On information and belief, defendants have continued to disseminate the video, including by selling it as P through the present. Plaintiff was fully identifiable in the video. Plaintiff had reasonable expectation that defendants would not secretly record a violent R of her and disseminate the video to others. By intentionally publicly humiliating plaintiff and trying to ruin plaintiff's romantic relationship with her then boyfriend when they published the video, defendants had the purpose of harassing, annoying, and or alarming the plaintiff. As a direct and proximate cause of defendants' actions in violation of New York Civil Rights Law 52B, the plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer emotional harm, including mental anguish, emotional distress, and humiliation in an amount to be determined at trial. Defendants' violations of New York Rights Law 52B were malicious, willful, wanton, and outrageous, entitling the plaintiff to an award of punitive damages. Defendants should be ordered to account for and destroy all copies of the video that are in their actual or constructive possession, custody, or control. Defendants should be temporarily and permanently enjoined from further disseminating or publishing any intimate images of the plaintiff. Third cause of action, violation of New York City Administrative Code 10-180, Combs and Sherman. Plaintiff hereby incorporates each of the foregoing paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. By recording and showing others the video of themselves violently R-ing the plaintiff, defendants disclosed an intimate image of the plaintiff without her consent in violation of New York Admin Code 10-180. Defendants are covered recipients because they recorded and or caused the video to be recorded themselves. On information and belief, defendants have continued to disseminate the video, including by selling it as P throughout the present. Such intimate images depicted plaintiff unclothed and with intimate body parts exposed and engaging in S contact with another person in violation of 10-180. Plaintiff was fully identifiable in the video. Plaintiff had a reasonable expectation that defendants would not secretly record a violent R of her and disseminate the videos to others, and certainly did not intend for the recording to be disclosed to anyone. Plaintiffs intentionally disclosed and disseminated the video to plaintiff's then boyfriend and others without plaintiff's consent, with the intent to publicly humiliate plaintiff and ruin her relationship with then boyfriend, causing her economic, physical, and or substantial emotional harm. Defendant's intention in disseminating and publishing the video was to harass, annoy, alarm, and intimidate, humiliate the plaintiff, and to cause her economic, physical, and or substantial emotional harm. As a direct and proximate cause of defendant's actions in violation of New York Admin Code 10-180, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer emotional harm, mental anguish, emotional distress, and or humiliation in an amount to be determined at trial. Defendants' violations of New York City Admin Code 10-180 were malicious, willful, wanton, and outrageous, entitling the plaintiff to an award of punitive damages. Defendants should be ordered to account and destroy for all copies of the video that are in their actual or constructive possession, custody, or control. Defendants should be temporarily and permanently enjoined from further disclosing and disseminating any intimate images of plaintiff. Wherefore, plaintiff respectfully requests that judgment be entered against the defendant as follows. A. Awarding compensatory damages for all physical injuries, emotional distress, psychological harm, anxiety, humiliation, physical and emotional pain and suffering, family and social disruption, and other harm in an amount to be determined at trial. Awarding punitive damages in an amount to be determined at trial. Awarding attorney's fees and costs pursuant to any applicable statute or law, including NYC Admin Code 10-1104, New York Civil Rights Law 52B, New York City Admin Code 10-180, and other applicable statute or law. Awarding pre- and post-judgment interest on all damages, fees, and or costs, attaching any and all defendants' real property and other assets located in the state of New York, pursuant to federal law of Civil Procedure 64. F. Ordering defendants to account for and destroy all properties of any and all images and videos taken of or in connection with Combs and Sherman's S.A. of plaintiff that are in their actual or constructive possession, custody, or control, and enjoining defendants temporarily and permanently from further disseminating or publishing any intimate images or videos of plaintiff, and awarding such others and further relief as this court may deem just and proper. Signed by attorneys for plaintiff. That is it on the complaint in Graves versus Combs, Sherman, and related businesses. Since the complaint, Graves has spoken out saying that, quote, "It goes beyond just physical harm caused by the assault. It's a pain that reaches into the very core of who you are and leaves emotional scars that may never fully heal. Some of the hardest parts of this pain are the shame and the guilt I've experienced that plays a negative role in my day-to-day ability to function properly," unquote. Joseph Big Joe Sherman called the allegations baseless and an attack on his character. Quote, "These accusations are not only false, but damaging to my character," unquote, Sherman said, adding, quote, "I have never met my accuser, and I was not working with Sean Combs during the time in question. I will be pursuing legal action to address this defamation and protect my name," unquote. Combs, meanwhile, continues to assert his innocence in this and the other allegations through a firewall of attorney, and he denies any wrongdoing. As far as the complaint's filing date, which I think was September 24th, she was the 11th plaintiff to file a lawsuit against Diddy since last fall. And since her filing, a Jane Doe has also filed suit, and there is word of a class action suit against Diddy as well. And I'd imagine I'll cover more Diddy lawsuits here in the future. Time will tell what the courts has to say. Anyway, that is it for today. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Please like, subscribe, share, and I will see all of you next time.